Hello, everyone. My name is Tyrone Howard, Professor of Education at UCLA and the President of the American Educational Research Association. I am excited and honored to be here with you today, no matter where you may be joining us in the world. So I would say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day to wherever you might be. Thank you for being here and welcome to this year's AERA Distinguished Lecture. This lecture is one of the top honors that can be bestowed upon a scholar in the field of education research. This individual selected to give this annual talk on the largest stage in research education is a luminary, is a pioneer, is a champion, is a change agent. And it brings me deep privilege and gratitude to introduce you to one of the most accomplished educators and scholars of our time and in our field, our lecturer today, Dr. Arnetha Ball. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Ball. Dr. Ball is a Charles Duckerman Endowed Professor Emerita in the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University and Professor Emerita in the Curriculum Studies, Teacher Education, Educational Linguistics, and Social Sciences and Education programs. At Stanford, Professor Ball previously served as the inaugural chair of the Cross-Area Cross-Disciplinary Program in Race, Inequality, and Language and Education as director of the university's program in African and African American Studies. Dr. Ball is one of the nation's leading scholars conducting research on educational linguistics, urban education, and teacher preparation to work with the poor, underachieving, and historically marginalized students in transnational contexts. Her work has had a profound impact on educators and students across the United States and worldwide, greatly advancing the field, and has inspired countless scholars, including yours truly. Before entering the professorate, Dr. Ball taught in preschool, elementary, and secondary classrooms for over 25 years and was the founder and executive director of the Children's Creative Workshop, which is an early education center that specializes in providing premier educational experiences for students from diverse backgrounds. Dr. Ball served as AERA's president from 2011 to 2012. She is an AERA fellow and was vice president of AERA's Division K, which is teaching and teacher education. Dr. Ball has been recognized for her rigorous and groundbreaking scholarship with numerous awards, including the 2009 AERA Palmer O. Johnson Memorial Award. The author or co-editor of 7 books and numerous articles, Dr. Ball is also an elected member of the National Academy of Education. Her impact transcends national borders. She has served as an academic specialist for the United States Information Services Program in South Africa and distinguished visiting scholar in professional developments in New Zealand and in Australia, where I had the good fortune to be able to spend a full week with Dr. Ball as she gave a series of riveting lectures across Australia. Her more recent research investigates the role of generativity in successful paradigms, principles, and practices in preparing teachers for diversity across national boundaries in countries that serve large numbers of historically marginalized students, including the US, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. The title of her lecture today is Conducting Consequential Research in Challenging Times, Generative Change for Educational Equity. In her talk, Dr. Ball will begin by highlighting some of the most pressing challenges facing education today, many of which have been exacerbated by inequitable access to applications of technology, which oftentimes leads to inequitable learning opportunities and outcomes. She will then pivot to discuss the potential of educational technology to address these pressing challenges. Dr. Ball will close with a few examples of innovative technology which are supporting generative change for educational equity while challenging the audience to do more. It is my privilege to have Dr. Ball with us today. I cannot say that you will find a more caring, deeply committed scholar, person, individual than Dr. Ball. She is someone who I consider not just a colleague, but someone I consider a dear friend. So it gives me great privilege and the utmost honor to introduce the lecture for today's AERA Distinguished Lecturer, Dr. Arnetha Ball.
Hi, Tyrone. Thank you for that introduction. Hello, one and all. My title for today's lecture is Conducting Consequential Research in Challenging Times, Generative Change for Educational Equity. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. It's good to have you here today. I'd like to begin by saying thank you to the audience and to AERA President Rich Milner. I'm honored to have been invited to deliver the 2023 Distinguished Research Lecture at this AERA annual meeting, and I'm honored to be here today. As an introduction, I'll simply say, as I'm coming to the mature years of my career, I have maintained my membership in AERA for over 30 years because of this organization's commitment to its mission to advance knowledge about education, encourage scholarly inquiry related to education, and promote the use of research to improve education and serve the public good. I think we've done a fine job of addressing the first two parts of that mission statement and advancing knowledge and about education and encouraging scholarly inquiry related to education. I do have some concerns about the third part of that mission. That is to promote the use of research to improve education and serve the public good. And as Cesar Chavez said, that the end of all service, the end of all knowledge should be service to others. And I will add to that, particularly to those who have been systematically and historically underserved by the system. And so in the conversation that follows, I ask that each of you reflect on the related mission statement of this organization and on the individual and collective goals of the pursuit of knowledge in a rapidly changing world. And in rapidly changing times, I further ask that you use this time and this occasion as an opportunity to personally reflect on your thoughts, your thoughts and your concerns concerning the conduct of consequential research that makes a real difference, that can improve the educational lives of all learners in a rapidly changing world. Here are some thoughts that my colleague, Richard Miller, thought about. He's a professor at UNLV. He collected a recent AI information and collected developments in AI, especially with respect to education. Note that he didn't go looking for this information. These things came to his attention, mostly via Twitter. He categorized his findings under two categories, hypes and fears. In the hypes category, he found that he saw a lot of hype in the messages he was receiving about automating basic research and writing tasks in literature reviews, summary, online abstracts, and the like. He also was able to find information that said that these new chat boxes that are coming out in AI would be good for writing drafts and collecting information. One piece was about medical research, but it also had references to education as well. And so the other types that he did was support for decision-making coming from these chat bots, to do some SWOT analysis, tool evaluation, supporting communications and professional development. These are the things that he was finding in the in the category of hypes that he was receiving. The second category he was finding was fears. In his fears category, people were asking the question, can artificial intelligence help for scientific writing? That's a good question. And That's a question that we need to answer before we move forward. Some of the fears he came across was creating and perpetuating false information in research practice and policy, including non-existing sources and discredited interpretations, reinscribing institutional racism, deficit model, minoritized groups and discrimination, and discriminatory practices, and some of the information that he was finding. Now, my friend, Dr. Miller, Richard over at UNLV, said that he was finding that he wanted to do an experiment with what he was finding from the chat boxes. And he found it extremely unreliable for research. For example, Richard asked the bot to explain how conceptualizations of child-centered education tend to support Eurocentric notions of service to whiteness. How was it operationalized? And to look at the ideology that seemed to be coming through. And he asked the chat box to provide 2 citations to support each point that it made. The answers that he received from the chat box looked very plausible. However, upon close examination, he found that the citations were made up. For example, the response begins, for example, in her book, Whiteness in the Classroom, Michael Pollack argues that child-centered education often reflects white middle-class norms and values, such as individualism, autonomy, and self-expression. And this is supposed to have been found in Pollack 2004, found in Rethinking Schools. But upon closer examination, he found that the second quote and citation seemed to have been completely made up. Micah Pollack, her article did not appear in that issue of Rethinking Schools. You couldn't find the article that was referred to by the chat box. Second quote was completely made up. And the third quote is said it was from Linda Smith's book, Decolonizing Methodologies. Now that book does exist, but the quote from the text from the book did not seem to be in the book. The fourth citation was from Joel Springs in publication entitled Empire of Education. It also was invented along with a quote from it. And of course, there's a general problem in the chat box is that what it was doing was parroting back to him his inquiry language, and it made no effort to consider the ideological thrust of his language, its use of terms like whiteness and deficit model. Instead, it created sources and quotes using Dr. Miller's words that seemed to reinforce what he had asked for. Now, it's worth noting that the scholars who were cited do exist, and they do work more or less in the areas cited. So the chat box didn't completely invent things. So it wasn't completely generative either. Just all the specifics were made up, including the word described to him. Now, this final example, it's something that Richard was really worried about as well. There were recent reports about an example of a misconduct claim about a university professor And the chat box named the professor and claimed that there were accusations of harassment by him at the university. None of this turned out to be true. These results are not a surprise when you realize that all these chat bots do is construct a text based on your query, plus an analysis of all the text that had been fed to the chat box. What had it been trained on? What was the program language and the data that it had been fed? One recurrent complaint about AI ethics from AI ethics folks like Dr. Jibru and her colleagues who have been fired from Google for pointing out these problems is that we have no idea what text these chatbots were trained on. The companies putting these programs out refuse to publish or even list the text that the chatbots were trained on, claiming that they are proprietary information. Given the discriminatory effects of early algorithmic software, we find that, for instance, when you ask for pictures of people who are likely to be doctors, you usually get all white men. It's totally reasonable to assume that AI software will also ascribe deficit models and reinforce discriminatory attitudes. And it's also totally reasonable to demand that the companies constructing these AI programs prove that this is not so by revealing their training data. When comparing the hype and the fears, I think the danger of relinquishing key areas of education to AI, certainly at this point, and possibly forever, should be a very clear question. How can school leaders and research leaders in our organization trust AI assisted assessment of students and teachers? And so we're just not sure at this time. How can schools communicate? How those communications can be left to AI is a big question. Even using AI to help build teaching schedules could reinforce existing inequalities concerning subjects and classrooms between groups of teachers and students. It's important to note that we're living in a time when new AI is the buzz, and it's one that is being referred to as a new generative AI buzz because they use visual tools such as generative adversarial networks called games in the industry, or transformers and adversarial and transformers extensively in their expression of ideas. These models have demonstrated impressive capabilities in generating images and music and text and videos, which has generated a lot of excitement in the research community and in the general public. These learning models are neural networks and machine learning techniques, and the learning models are characterized by their ability to automatically learn hierarchical representations of data from raw input. But the question remains. So we have these fears of reinscribing racism that is already existing in the data, supporting and intensifying carceral logics of schooling through surveillance and and allowing
It's moving.
the students and the users to decide who's white, who's Middle Eastern, who's East Asian. And so we're not sure where they're going with this. In other words, they're collecting more data, which and then this false accusations of individuals, which you have to be pretty skilled to know what to investigate to find out where this information came from. And so the question remains, have we failed to interrogate whether the use of these advanced technologies are up to the task of also addressing the most basic educational challenges facing education, teachers, schools, families, and communities? Note that the learning is based on accumulative knowledge, the databases that the chat boxes are trained on, but they're not generative. And so we are very concerned if we find that we think this is generative, but it's not really. Some of the things are made up and not reliable. And we need to know more about these technological tools. Where are the databases that they are building upon before jumping headlong into an uncritical use of these technologies? Perhaps we should ask ourselves the question, as a research community, should we be using these technologies in their current form? Are we jumping on it too early and turning them over to our students, particularly to be used in some ways by elite schools and students, and in other ways for practice by poor, historically underserved students who have a lot of paper practice work. So we need to do the consequential research. Has it been embarked on in order to determine if the technology is designed for the public good or for the corporate good? If we find that they don't identify their sources and that they deploy deep fakes in mimicking people or specific individuals, if it makes it difficult to identify the bias that is present in the original sources, if it has its conversational sounding content that makes it hard to identify if the information is reliable or not. If we're not sure if what we're looking at is generated from fake news or AI generated fakes, if it could impersonate others, we could have a problem for social engineering and cyber attacks. We must ask ourselves, do the pros of today's new technologies outweigh the cons? If we have all of these ifs, is there bias reflected in the sources? And does it disrupt existing ethical models? And in research, how can we introduce our students to doing research if it doesn't follow the ethical models? This could lead to a significant increase in cases of academic misconduct on the part of students. It could also be biased and use stereotyped information, which it collects from chat box users themselves. And so, does it serve the public good? That is what we must be interrogating. There's great potential for these new technologies to create a one-size-fits-all approach to learning, that the students are receiving the same information and feedback on models that are output that limit their ability to develop their own unique perspectives and their own unique voices as users of these AI technologies. So I'm going to pose a question. I'm posing the question which says, do the new technologies have a good potential to facilitate the development of our students becoming generative thinkers who may soon be producers of knowledge rather than just consumers of knowledge? We think about the airline industry. For years, we had people behind those desks to help us to get our airline tickets. But now all of this is done by technology. I also remember when reading about after Brown versus Board of Education, Black administrators and teachers were fired because they were considered not useful anymore. And that situation has not been corrected to this day. And so we need to look at present day challenges. Will they change? Unless we begin to move out of our comfort zones to embrace the goal of facilitating the development of generative thinking students, not only in our elite and private schools, but in our public schools as well. And so my concerns, which I'll make very clear to you at this point, my key concern is, have we failed to use emerging advanced technologies to address the most basic challenges facing education for teachers, students, families, and communities? One of my key questions, how might we better mobilize the use of the incredible potential of this new technology to generate change in our schools and communities, to finally make a down payment on the educational debt that is owed to so many? So we have pressing challenges before us, and our researchers should be doing consequential research to tell the chat box companies what we need to educate the types of students that we really want to produce in our schools. We must consider how we might support generative change for educational equity. Who's asking this question? And does the positive outweigh the negative? Is new generative AI buzz? It's referring to models of generativity, but based on my research and the work of others, this is not what we mean when we say generativity. These models are demonstrating impressive abilities in generating images, music, text, videos. And it's exciting for some aspects of our research community and the general public, but it's not very useful in teaching our students to be critical thinkers and researchers who base their work on sound practices. And so I want to point out what do we mean? What do I mean when I say generativity? Generative change is the pathway to cognitive growth, to change in classroom practices, to pedagogical ingenuity, to personalized learning, to racial equity, to the well-being of our students. And this is what we need to find. Oh boy. Okay. And we can find more work on how algorithmics of oppression were written about by Dr. Sophia Nobles. She provides lots of clarity in her 2008 book, where she talks about how search engines reinforce racism. Search engines are oppressive systems that privilege whiteness. And so we need to think about this before we put this in front of our students. What is generativity? What does it mean to you as educational researchers? How might you model generativity? So generativity in my research is about being exposed to new knowledge, truthful knowledge, its ability to generate new and novel thinking, new and novel behavior, problem solving, and creative action. This is the single most important skill we can facilitate through education. Educational research can help us see if technology supports that mission. Is it truthful? Is it knowledgeable? Is it written with the right attitudes and dispositions, desire for all to become agents of change? And so perhaps this is a perfect time for us to ask ourselves some questions. Have we failed to interrogate the whether these advanced technologies are up to addressing such basic challenges facing teachers and families and communities? And it is now a perfect time for our organization to stop, ask the question, how might we better mobilize some of the incredible potential of these tools to generate the change needed in our schools and community, to finally make that down payment that is needed for change? Generativity is a complex psychosocial construct. It includes logic, creativity, and generating new ideas. As we can see here, generativity is the ability to connect our personal and professional knowledge with what we learn from our students and our context. That's the same thing our students do. They put these things together. Knowledge becomes generative when learners see the need to innovate in light of their existing challenges. That's what we do as researchers. That's what our students will do. They will become creative, innovative, and generative thinkers, combined with action and self-initiative. As they go through the model of generative change, of awakening and agency and advocacy and efficacy, as they reflect on new information that they're exposed to, as they introspect, use critique, and develop their own voices on what should be done. And so generativity is about cognitive and behavioral change. Is that what the chat boxes are doing? So we want a call to action. It's past time for educators to look to others to address the learning needs of our students in our schools and classrooms. Educators responsible for providing generative education for all our students. Educators, educational leaders must be generative in their behavior so that they can model it for teachers, students, and staff. As we share our visions and our ideas, we have the power to make powerful things happen. And so we ourselves must be generative, must be agents of change. Schools must inspire and teach, motivate, and empower students to think in creative ways rather than to just do what they're told to do by a chat box and sit down and just do practice. And so we ask the question, whenever I have these kinds of questions, I go back to the mission story, the mission statement. Have we failed to use emerging technologies to address the most basic challenges facing us, to make our students generative producers of knowledge? How might we motivate and mobilize the incredible potential that is here before us? And so rather than to allow carte blanche access to the minds of our students, what we need to do is use educational time to let our students see what they have the potential to do. We need to improve the quality and quantity of educational content, and we must consider how to use these new resources. We must do the consequential research that has not yet been embarked upon in order to determine, is this for the public good? It does not allow all students equal access, because that is determined by how it's used in the classroom. And we would like to make sure that these chatbox companies are actually helping us to reach our educational goal. I'm going to close with a brief story which shows how Grandmaster Flash and other students from public schools and perhaps under-resourced groups can and will build upon culture and context as he did when he was a teenager. Did you know that Grandmaster Flash also invented the slip mat turntable? Popular culture has a tendency to romanticize major innovations with moments, and they anoint them with visionaries who have done these incredible things, but it's far less glamorous when we know the full story behind these inventions. So on the 13th of August, 1973, is supposed to have been the birth of the slip mat turntable. And Peck was DJing his first block party when he was actually just marking the birthday of his sister at a block party. Well, Grandmaster Flash gave a candid interview to Washington Post in which he reveals the endless trial, scientific tests, and harebrained research that actually went into the early turntablism inventions. He describes himself as a geek. Flash describes how he did extensive studies of the stylus, the needles used to figure out the proper needle that would stay inside the groove when he was playing on his hip hop turntable. The next problem was that the material of the slip mat, which was at the time made out of rubber, it was not yet able to hold the record. It was limp. When I was trying to move the vinyl counterclockwise, said Flash, it caused too much drag and too much friction, so I had to remove it, he explained. The steel platter underneath was not good either, for obvious reasons. My mother was a seamstress, so I knew about different types of materials. The problem was that the felt was that it draped. It was limp, he recalls. So he ran home and got a copy of the album. He brought just enough felt to cut 2 round circles about the size of a 33 LP and went into his mother when she wasn't looking. He turned the iron way up high and used his mother's spray starch. He sprayed it until the limp piece of felt became like a wafer, just like the one you may have at church sometimes. Today, it's called a slip mat. Finally, he needed the proper turntable. So he looked around at all the turntables. He tried different ones, Fisher-Price, Magnavox. Flash stumbled across the Technics SL23 in a Bronx store. They were only $75, which was a lot of money for him, but he had a after-school messenger job. And after school, he was able to save up the money for these 2 turntables. These particular turntables are considered the great grandfather to what is known as the 1200 today. Every DJ that saw what he was using as a turntable started buying the Technics turntables. It came from a scientific approach, he explains. Once I came up with the cueing, the proper needle, the wafer, the duplicated copies of the records, the mixer, which had been rebuilt by him, he was able to turn a 10-second drum beat and make it seamlessly 10 minutes long. And the rest is history. This is what our students will do if we give them opportunities to use their expert knowledge from their communities, from the needs that they want to accomplish at a birthday party even. It has to be generative, inventive, and the students, teachers, others at all language, we must optimize their development. And I wanted you to know that if we will have faith in our students, we can believe that they can be generative thinkers who will become producers of knowledge. And of course, we must do the best we can until we know better. Then, with the educational researchers out there doing consequential research to help us to know better, then when we know better, we have to do better. Why do we want to do better? Because it's for the public good and because our students deserve the very best. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for considering what we need to do as we move forward with new technologies and begin to meet the needs of our students who are generative producers of knowledge if given an opportunity. Thank you.
We want to thank you, Dr. Ball, for a riveting talk and challenging all of us to think about the ways that we need to be generative thinkers. You really got me when you showed Grandmaster Flash. Here we are celebrating the 50th year of hip hop, and your incorporation of Grandmaster Flash and his genius and innovation is, I think, just a small symbolic way in which our young people can show that same kind of genius when we are able to create generative learning spaces that recognize the impact of culture and context. And so you have given us a charge how to think about technology, to question the biases that are in technology, to help our students become critical thinkers as they engage in generative spaces. So I want to say, we want to say as an organization, thank you for your charge to all of us for pushing us in a loving way to be generative in our approaches with our pedagogy, with our instruction, with our content, with our assessment. Outstanding, outstanding, outstanding. And I want to thank President Past, Rich Milner, for his selection for you to give the AERA Distinguished Lecture. You did not disappoint. So show her some love, folks, if you can, in the chat or the Q&A. Just let her know how much you have appreciated what she shared with us. One of the things I've always been very much appreciative of with Dr. Ball is her willingness to think about generativity, how it shapes our thinking, how it shapes our teaching, how it shapes our behavior. And I think about what you said, Dr. Ball. It reminds me of something my grandmother always said: when you know better, you do better. And I think that your research on generativity has been really, really transformative because it has challenged us all to be better and not to look at our students as being the challenge, but to look at us in the classroom context and learning environments that we set as where the change needs to occur. So thank you for the powerful insight on generativity as consequential research, a lot of food for thought. So for all of the folks out there who are listening, please share with others the need to go onto the AERA website to see the talk in its entirety if they may have missed it, because it's something that will definitely leave you with lots of food for thought. Again, we want to thank you for coming out to be a part of the AERA Distinguished Lecture with Dr. Arnetha Ball. We hope that you all will continue to enjoy the remainder of the sessions that are available throughout the second day of the virtual summit. And I want to thank you for being part of our community and continue to keep growing, thinking, and being part of the change that we all want to see. Thank you so very much.